Okay, perfect. I think we're ready to start. So good morning, everyone. Thank you ever so much for joining us this morning. My name is Christian from University of Essex, your host for today. I would like to introduce to you our newest webinar in our Breaking Business Barriers series with sales and marketing, part of our Space to Grow program. We are recording these webinars, so if you are in the need of the actual recording, we can distribute that to you in the coming days. Throughout the duration of this webinar, please feel free to ask any questions that you might have. What we'll do is we'll collect those and we'll answer those towards the end of the webinar. Now, I would like to introduce to you our speaker for today, Malcolm Johnston, who will be speaking to you on developing customer relationships. We are ready when you are, Malcolm.
Thanks very much, Christian. Good morning, everyone. I'm what they call a pracademic, or I call myself a pracademic, which means that I'm primarily a business consultant, and I also do some work in academia, and I'm an executive fellow of the university's business school. This is the second in the series. The first one was on marketing. This one is on what you might call selling. So I'm just going to share my screen and bring up the slide deck. This is going to be very rapid because I'm trying to provide as much information that I think you may not already have in a relatively short time, and I hope it will be useful. Do please ping your questions to Christian, who will collate them, as we've often found that questions come from separate people on much the same topics. So he will collate and curate the questions that I will answer towards the end. So here we go with sharing screen. And slideshow. There we go. Okay. Just move that screen out of the way. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is the second in the series. First one was on marketing. This is on, for want of a better phrase, sales. And you'll see why I keep saying for want of a better phrase, because I don't like the term sales. But both these webinars are, if you like, in the context of a new concept that I'm developing called outside-in marketing. For the last 20 years, I've been a consultant, and I'm still a consultant to businesses in mostly East Anglia and some in the City of London. And in every single one of those businesses, be they large or small, I have found that the sales and the marketing function are still pushing product at a customer. And this is fundamentally wrong. And the webinar that I did a couple of weeks ago on marketing and this one together, hopefully will give you an idea of a different way of looking at these terms, sales and marketing. Now, that is the typical image that certainly British people have of a salesman. When I left the army, I had an interview with my general, and I was going to join BT as a salesperson. And when I told him that I was going into sales, he said, "What a most un-officer-like profession, get out." And that was, and to a large extent, typically is the view of selling in this country. Whereas in America, it's considered a highly complex and nuanced profession. And if you are a salesperson, a successful salesperson in America, you are lauded as such. Now, this guy here, it looks like he's trying to flog you something. If you think that selling is all about telling, it most certainly isn't. Selling is definitely not telling, it's listening. And I'm going to give you a few thoughts on processes and people around sales. So basic sales skills, there are many basic sales skills, but I've picked two that I think you may not be aware of. The first of these is understanding the customer's buying behavior. In academic terms, this is called OBB, or organizational buying behavior. And the second basic sales skill is the decision-making unit and understanding the decision-making unit. Now, why do we need to understand buying behavior? Most organizations will have a buying cycle that is similar to this. And it's important, if you are in a selling mode, to understand where you are in your customers' buying behavior. I have witnessed many salespeople trying to force a customer into their sales cycle, as opposed to adapting your sales cycle to the customer's buying cycle. And if you try to do that, you will come unstuck. I should have said that actually all of what we're talking about today is about dealing with current customers. This is not behaviors that's going to potentially win new business, although if you follow any of what I'm saying today, you will undoubtedly get better at winning new business. But I'm particularly interested in key account management and in the development of closer relationships with current customers. So for any of your, certainly your bigger customers, you should know where they are in their cycle, their buying cycle. So if we start at the top here, purchase initiation can be from within the business. Let's say a disaster happens or something changes, but there will be some sort of change that requires the business to look at potentially buying a product or service. Of course, if you're a good salesperson, you can nudge the customer to initiate a purchase. And that is the sign of a very good salesperson. Now, as we're going round here, there is a question, at what stage does sales typically get involved? Well, in my experience, unfortunately, sales tends to get involved here at the shortlist going to an RFP. An RFP is a request for a proposal. Now, if this is the first time you've spoken to the customer about their need, and the first time you speak to the customer is when they ask you for a proposal, your chances of winning competitively are pretty slim, because you want to be up here stimulating and altering your customer's evaluation criteria so that it is more likely that you win the deal. And if you haven't had the opportunity to work with the customer to rearrange their evaluation criteria, then your chances of winning are pretty slim. Now, an example of this was with a company called Bristol Myers Squibb. I worked as a chief operating officer for a pharmaceutical wholesaler, and the week I arrived there, they had just lost a bid to become Bristol Myers Squibb's preferred supplier for a certain set of services and products. And we knew that they would be going out to tender in 3 years' time. And over the next 3 years, I worked with Bristol Myers Squibb, regularly in touch with them, and if you like, manipulating their views of what was important in their buying criteria, such that when the request for a proposal came out 3 years hence, we had influenced the evaluation criteria to such an extent that it was highly likely that our business would win that contract. And indeed we did, and we became the sole supplier of clinical trials, equipment and services to Bristol Myers Squibb for the next 3 years. But it was a 3-year sales cycle working on what Bristol Myers Squibb perceived as the appropriate evaluation criteria. So selling is not about coming in at the RFP stage. Good salesmanship is about working with the customer, understanding what they need, and if necessary, rearranging in their heads what they consider to be important so that it meets what your business is good at. So that's organizational buying behavior. And as I say, you need to know in your sales cycle where you are vis-a-vis the customer's buying behavior. And a good salesperson is involved at every one of these stages, either overtly or covertly. The second thing that's important for a salesperson or someone in sales to understand is who is in the decision-making unit. And It doesn't matter how many times the person opposite you on the Zoom call or opposite you at a desk tells you, I am the sole person responsible for making this decision. They're wrong. They never are. A budget can be withdrawn very quickly. So another person that is always involved in the decision making is someone in finance, or maybe the finance director of your customer. Unless the buyer has a budget, you're not going to get a sale. So part of the salesperson's job is to find out who precisely is in the decision making unit. Finding out what overt authority do they have. Now, overt authority is what it says in the business unit manual. However, you also need to understand what political authority they have. For example, if you look at a number of businesses, and certainly this has happened to me many, many times, if you look at the backgrounds of some of the people in the decision-making unit, you may well find that two people who are apparently distantly connected with no influence over each other at all, in fact worked together 5 years ago and may be close buddies. This has certainly happened to me. I've also been trying to sell to certain businesses and found that there were other outside relationships going on that weren't very obvious. So you need to use LinkedIn to find out not just the overt authority of a member of the decision-making unit, but what the political authority is as well. You need to find out who has the sign-off authority and to what level. This is a vastly underutilized tactic in sales. If you're trying to sell something that's a £20,000 deal, and you find out the person with whom you're talking only has sign-off authority to £10,000, you could make it easy for that person to sign it off by offering to provide them with 2 invoices, both for £10,000, that he or she can sign off. Because as soon as you go to another level and to someone in the decision-making unit who has not been involved at that point in listening to your sales pitch, then you can start all over again. So you do need to know who's got sign-off authority and at what level. You may find horrible people like me, consultants involved, and this has happened many, many times. I've lost count of the number of times that I've been involved in helping a business to choose, for example, a CRM system. Some of the more switched on businesses selling into my customers have worked out that I've been involved in prompting the customer and guiding them. Some haven't, and then have been very surprised if they get to the presentation stage to find this strange bloke who isn't even an employee sitting in on the meeting. So do find out if the customer is getting advice from an external consultant, either formally or informally. As I said in the last set of slides, you need to work out how they buy. And will procurement get involved? Now, this typically only happens in a larger business where there is a procurement department. Procurement is a difficult organization to work with if they aren't involved. If procurement are going to get involved, you as a salesperson need to get them involved early. They will automatically be suspicious if a buyer within your customer has been talking to you about buying your product or service for 3 months and procurement has not got involved. So it's going to be a challenge dealing with procurement, always is, but if you don't get them involved early, it'll come back to bite you. And as we spoke about at the last seminar on marketing, about what motivates people and whether people are motivated in the decision-making unit by the same things. So you may have one point of contact in the customer, and that point of contact sees the world through his or her eyes. But you need to find out whether someone who is in the decision-making unit, but maybe is a more senior or strategic level contact, you need to find out what their motivations are and whether they see things the same as your primary contact. So salespeople, hopefully you're seeing by now or hearing by now, have to be very good at questioning, have to be very good at putting jigsaw puzzles together. They are basically intelligence operatives. They are not pushing a product at this point. They are listening carefully and asking good questions so that they understand the lie of the land. And really, when one is selling to a larger organization, putting together a jigsaw puzzle is the closest analogy I can think of to the role of a salesperson. So the decision-making unit typically contains this group of people. Excuse me. The decision makers in the middle, buyers, and that could be people in procurement, users, people who are going to use the product or service, gatekeepers. Gatekeepers can be in large organizations, people who manage who goes on to the list of companies to receive an RFP. And I'll tell you a little anecdote about this and the importance of a gatekeeper. Many years ago, I was involved in trying to sell a radar system to the United States Air Force and United States Marine Corps. And we had Margaret Thatcher and Michael Heseltine on our side. We arranged for the Secretary of State for Defense and the Navy Secretary from America to come over and get a flight in the Nimrod aircraft that contained our radar system so they could see it work. We were pulling all sorts of political levers in order to promote this particular radar system to the Americans. And we knew that a request for proposal was coming out, and when the request for proposal was supposed to come out, we didn't get it. And the reason we didn't get it is that the salesperson responsible hadn't found that in the bowels of the Pentagon was a gatekeeper. It was a Marine Corps sergeant whose sole job was to keep a list of potential radar suppliers around the world. And our salesperson hadn't found this person and hadn't made sure that our name was on the list. So all of the high-flying political stuff that we'd done, which would have been very useful had we got the RFP, was to no avail because we hadn't found the gatekeeper. So that's one serious example. Another perhaps less serious example is a secretary or a personal assistant or an executive assistant or even a receptionist can be a gatekeeper. If you're promoting something or trying to sell something to an organization, you can bet that if you go in with an arrogant, unfriendly attitude to the receptionist and the security people, that information will get back to the managing director. So I learned very quickly in sales to be very polite and friendly to all potential gatekeepers, and that starts at the front door of your organization to which you're selling. And then finally, we've got influencers. Now, influencers can be within the organization or it can be outside the organization. And in today's world, it's a lot of the influence will come from Twitter, from journalists, from online information. And indeed, in retail, 90% of the buying decisions of individuals are influenced by their online experience. So despite the fact someone might go to, let's say, John Lewis to buy something, 90% of their buying behavior in John Lewis has been impacted by what they've seen and heard of John Lewis online. So influencers are much broader than they were 40 to 50 years ago. And it's the role of marketing to influence the influencers. It's up to sales to help to try to identify those influencers, and it's up to marketing in particular to lead on communicating with those influencers to create an environment in which a salesperson is more likely to succeed. So there's an awful lot of networking going on here and a lot of communication between these individuals in the decision-making unit. And the role of the salesperson is to, as large extent as possible, is to control the information that is going between all of these people to the benefit of the salesperson and your own business. So you need to know who these might be in your customer base. And one of the reasons that it's important that we use this language is salespeople will be brought into your business from all sorts of different places. You must inculcate your salespeople with using the same language. So when they are talking about a decision maker, do they actually mean a decision maker, or are they confusing a decision maker with a user? It's important, if you're going to be running a sales force, that you use the same language across the whole of the sales force, and you work to the same process. So moving on to the depth with which you're going to have to understand these people in the decision-making unit. Salespeople, together with marketing, should work on creating a decision-making unit persona for each member of the decision-making unit. Excuse me. Now, I've put one here with this is an absolutely typical persona, and really a good salesperson should be filling this in physically. Marketing should be heavily involved in this, and providing more and more detail for each member of the decision-making unit for each of their customers over a period of time. So you build up some intelligence on the people to whom you're trying to sell. And this is obviously of use to the salesperson, because the salesperson can adjust their behaviors and their approach accordingly. And it's obviously of use for marketing, because they can adjust the messages they're communicating to these people accordingly. And this is why when you're recruiting salespeople, they've got to be people who are really interested in people and what motivates people. They've also got to be very flexible, because they have to deal with a very wide range of people in the customer. Some nice, some not so nice. Did I mention Tesco? Oh, sometimes selling to a business, did I say Tesco? Can be really painful and hard work and unsatisfying. But a salesperson has got to put up with that and got to crack on with it. So whenever I've recruited salespeople, I've tried to look for those that have got the hide of a rhinoceros to take all the knocks, but they also need the sensitivity of a dove, because they need to be sensitive to their decision-making unit individuals, different personas and different approaches to both people and issues. And finally, what we're really trying to find out, much the same as in the marketing webinar we did a few weeks back, is you're trying to find out what is the perceived benefit of your product or service to each individual in the decision-making unit. And those of you who attended the marketing session will know that I'm obsessive about getting rid of the term USP. I have been in so many sales situations where as soon as the salesperson sits down opposite a buyer, they immediately go into pushing their product by talking about their so-called unique sales point or unique sales proposition. And the customer really doesn't want to hear this. What they want to hear is, what is the benefit of this particular product or service to me as an individual, to my team, and to my organization? And that is what all this research into the decision-making unit is about. It's understanding what are the unique benefits that each individual in the decision-making unit is after for themselves, for their team or their project, and for the company as a whole, and ensuring that that information is communicated through sales and marketing to make sure that the customer is getting a consistent message aligned with their needs from both the individual salesperson and from the marketing team. So a short pause for another glug of water, if you'd excuse me. So, advanced sales skills. I'm going to talk about the sales process and sales meetings. Advanced sales skills is about a week-long training course, and I'm picked out two particular pieces that I think are going to be of most use to you in your businesses. Firstly, there should be a process for selling to customers. Now, it's oriented around the customer's buying behavior, but it is important to have a prescriptive sales process. I've put in here some research from various areas. Probably the most important is the bottom bullet point from Harvard Business Review that talks about the difference between a responsive approach, which is basically controlled by the customer, versus a proactive and prescribed approach where the salespeople are doing more to stimulate and work within the organizational buying behavior. And what we're looking to do is to make buying from you easier than buying from one of your competitors. No one wants hassle. No one wants hassle in a business. Everyone's busy. So the easier you can make it to buy from you, the more likely you are to be successful. And if you appear to your customer as being knowledgeable about the sales process, and that you are going through a particular process and you know the next steps, and you are working with the member of the decision-making unit to agree those next steps, if you sell professionally, it's easy, and you make it easy for the customer to buy from you. And as this research from Harvard Business School identified, those companies that had a proactive prescriptive approach increased purchase ease for the customer by 86%. So make it easy for the customer. And there's an infographic from CEB Global, which is a research organization that again demonstrates that a proactive approach guides customers through decision making. Make it easy for them to buy from you. So you will hopefully all be familiar with the opportunity pipeline. You may well have heard salespeople talk about their pipeline. And when you're in charge of salespeople, it's very important to make sure that they know what their pipeline looks like. So there will always be a sales pipeline. Warm leads go in one end. You do initial qualification, secondary qualification, negotiation, and we hope that you get a win. And the qualification is all about good questioning. So we're now going to move on to qualification criteria. So what does qualification do? Qualification to a specific process gives you a more rigorous approach to building and managing your pipeline, and a whole load of other benefits to running a proper qualification process. And again, qualification is a sales term. It's a term that you should be using with your salespeople and saying to them, how have you qualified this customer? Where are you in the qualification process? And so on and so forth. And by asking good questions, your salespeople will develop a better relationship with the customer. The customer expects to be asked questions. And frankly, on a personal basis, who doesn't like to be asked questions about themselves and their needs? There's nothing more off-putting to a buyer than never getting the chance to speak because the salesperson is just going blah, 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 pushing product features. Qualification criteria that I'm about to give you is much more sophisticated than the standard BANT, which is budget, authority, need, and time frame. BANT they're good qualification criteria, but they are very basic and they don't particularly help you to identify where you need to work in order to improve your chances of selling. So I've come up with a qualification criteria called Optimist, and these cover opposition, which is competition. Do you have any competition? Number of salespeople I've coached who have no idea who else is bidding for exactly the same work is unbelievable. It's often not difficult to find out who's bidding against you, because if you look through the visitor's book, if there is such a thing, on the way into a building, you quickly look at the names of all the other people who've been in the building over the last couple of days, and you find out what companies they come from and could they be competitors. So the first thing questioning you need to do is to find out, is there opposition? Second area of questioning is around the purchase process or organizational buy behavior. What is the purchase process? Thirdly, what are the timescales for the customer? Fourth, individuality. What is it that's different about your particular product or service? And has the customer acknowledged that you have got some sort of individuality in your proposal? Money, is there a budget? Next I is influence. Have you got influence in all of the areas of the decision-making unit? So it's one thing to understand the decision-making unit. It's quite another to know whether you've actually got influence over key people. Penultimate area for qualification is size. Is it worth going for? I have, in my sales time and as a sales manager and as a sales director, not bid for certain pieces of work, because frankly the amount of effort required to bid for something when we feel we haven't got much of a chance of winning, if it isn't a big enough prize, it's not worth going for. You can divert your resources elsewhere. And then finally, the T of optimist is targeted need. So not a difficult acronym to remember for salespeople, as all salespeople tend to be optimists. And the questioning that you do with your customers should be around these areas. If you can talk around these 8 areas with a customer, you will get a better idea of their requirements and a better idea of where you sit vis-a-vis your competitors. So this helps guide your questioning of a customer. It's also very helpful in valuing your sales pipeline. So what I would expect every salesperson to have in your organization is a score sheet, either physically or online or whatever, that identifies where you are in the sales process for your particular service with a particular customer. And it's very simple. There are 8 criteria, as I've just gone through, and they add up to 80%. So if you look to the far right of this table, you'll see we know enough and are well positioned. So if you know enough and you are well positioned in terms of opposition, so let's say there is no other bidder, then you can award yourself 10%. If you really know the purchasing process of the customer, award yourself 10%, and so on and so forth. Now, if you've done a really good job in selling and you've gone through the optimist qualification criteria, you could end up with an 80% chance of winning that business. Now, the opposite is also true. You could award yourself minus. Now, don't go to minus 3.6 or plus 5.2. In my time as a sales manager, I've got the sales team to just do minus 10, minus 5, 0, plus 5, plus 10. That's it. And for those of you who are wondering why it doesn't add up to 100%, it's very simple. When a salesperson tells you, yeah, absolutely certain, we've definitely won this, don't believe a word of it. A sale is only a sale when the product has been delivered and the customer's paid for it. And in 40 years of selling, I've had many situations where I've thought that I had an 80% chance of a win, oh sorry, 100% chance for a win. There is always something that can get in the way to muck at that last 20%. So I never award more than 80% chance. Now, when you're producing your pipeline, if you multiply, your percentage chance by the order value, you will get what is called a factored sales value. Now, accountants hate this because they don't understand how you multiply percentages by a sum and get a different figure. their view is you've either won the business or you haven't. That is indeed true, but in order to get some idea of the value of potential sales, this is a more educated, more rigorous way of coming up with some sort of overall factored sales value for the year ahead that takes some notice of the way that each individual sale is progressing with a customer. So I'm going to leave that there. Optimist is the acronym. If you question the customer in these areas and you get a better understanding of the customer's requirements in each of these areas, you are advancing the sale because you're asking the right questions of the customer, and the customer will be impressed by your professional salesmanship, and you are improving your chances of winning the order, hopefully to around 80%. Okay, excuse me for a quick glug, and then we'll move on to the process for sales meetings. Now, the reason we've got this up here is I have seen, and frankly, when I was initially a salesperson before being given any training, I had no idea what a sales meeting was. I thought you went along and you had a chat, generally speaking, in the area of the customer's need and what you had in your little bag to sell to them. And they were deeply unsatisfied, but I had no idea what I was doing. Then I went on my first sales course, and then I found out what a sales meeting is. And it absolutely revolutionized what I did. And unfortunately, I have seen most salespeople that I've coached, by far the majority of salespeople I've coached in the last 20 years, don't do this well. They go in, they have a pleasant chat, they think they've had a sales meeting. Well, I've got news. All meetings are sales meetings. Even a meeting when you are entertaining a customer at Tottenham, or to the rugby at Twickenham, or taking them out on the golf course, every time you have an interaction with a customer, it is a sales meeting, and you need to prepare accordingly. So here is another acronym, SPEND, which will help you to construct a process for your sales meetings. I'll just go through each individual element of this. So the first thing is situation, establishing the situation that you are in with that customer. The next is understanding the customer's problem. The next area is what effect that problem has on the customer's business. Fourth area is to get an explicit need identified by the customer. If there is no need, you aren't going to be able to sell your product or service, but the customer has to articulate that need. And then demonstrate your ability to meet that need and close the deal. And that is called SPEND. Now, I've gone through this in a very obvious, clear process way. In effect, what really happens is it's something of an iterative process. You don't start off the meeting saying, right, let's establish the situation. Right, we've now got the situation, let's get on to the problem. You have to put this sort of process within what the customer will feel is a normal conversation. This is why salesmanship is hard, because the salesperson has to control the conversation and move it along, whilst understanding and leading in each of these areas. So let me give you some examples here. Sorry, okay. Now, you need to plan the call and decide on your stated objectives and your unstated sales objective. So your stated objective may be to better understand your requirements for a widget. Actually, your unstated sales objective is always something that is going to progress the relationship. So it could be that your covert, your unstated sales objective is, I'm going to get this guy to email his boss to tell him how impressed he is with our services and capabilities. You're not going to tell that to the person opposite you, but that is your unstated sales objective. Or it could be, I've found out maybe that in fact the finance director is going to have quite an influence in the decision making. So I want you to get me a meeting with your finance director to bring forward the budget for this project. That's not an overt stated objective, that's your unstated sales objective. So if you're running a sales team, particularly if you're going out and coaching them, you need to ask them, what is the stated objective and what is your sales objective? Frankly, if a salesperson doesn't get the difference between those two, they're probably not a real salesperson. I've given you a quick overview of the sort of unstated sales objectives you may have versus the stated objective at a meeting. So as I say, this can happen on the, entertaining at football, a casual conversation at halftime or something like that. You can just get one of these in that will take your sales process that bit further forward. If you don't progress a sale during each of your interactions with a customer, you're not doing a good job as a salesman. So we've only got 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to cover this in 10 minutes because we've probably got some questions that have come in. So spend, situation. What is the current situation? Now, you don't go into a meeting with a customer without having done your research, so you should have an idea before you go in, and it's not difficult with the World Wide Web. What is the situation with that organization? Now, this is too much to go into in detail on this webinar, but in fact the salesperson, the good salesperson, will find out the situation for the organization, the department or the project, and the individual's situation. So a salesperson, it should always be selling on 3 levels: the organizational level, the department or project level, and the personal level. And a good salesman will be able to understand the situation for the company, the department or the project, and the individual concerned. They're trying to identify, and you should be trying to identify, circumstances that indicate your expertise may be used. Be interested. The person who is talking passionately about their project that they're working on at the moment is going to be pretty put off if the salesperson is so busy taking notes that all the buyer ever sees is the top of their head. So you have to demonstrate enthusiasm and interest that matches, that mirrors what the buyer's body language and use of language is getting across to you. So always ask for clarification and paraphrase back to the customer what they said about their situation. Okay, what challenges are created by this situation? And if you can identify what in sales we call the pain condition, you are a long way towards being able to sell. So what are the pain conditions that this problem creates for the person opposite you at organization, department, and individual level? And think of your services as the solution to a company's problems. But unless this is if you've got a relatively small value product or service, you may be able to know pretty quickly what product or service would solve this problem. However, I would suggest, if possible, do not talk solutions at this stage. So if you've just spent ages getting the customer to tell you about their problem and they think it is a real problem, you may well know that you've got the product or service that will solve this problem in a jiffy. Don't tell them you can solve their problem at this stage. You need to get your customer to have a good wallow. Wallowing is very important, and the British absolutely love having a good wallow. And what you're trying to do is to get the buyer to have a good wallow in his or her problems in your area of expertise. The deeper the wallow they have, the bigger the problem they think they've got that to them is unsolvable. You know, probably at this stage, that you can solve it. And that's why I said you don't want to tell them that you can solve it at this problem at this point, because you want the customer to have a good wallow in his or her problems in your area of expertise. And the bigger the wallow, the more value they will have in their heads to anyone who comes up with a solution. If you only allow them a short wallow and you say to them, no, that's not really a problem, well, they just told you it is a problem. So don't turn around to them and say, no, it isn't a problem, or it's a very simple problem, because if it's a simple problem, it'll be a cheap solution. If it's a deep, dirty, horrible problem that the customer's had a good wallow in, they are more likely to see value in you solving that really difficult problem for them, and therefore price is less of an issue. And another reason that you need them to have a good wallow is you need to ask the question, so what? So what effect does that problem have on your project? So what impact does that have on you as an individual and meeting your targets? So what effect does that have on the organization if such and such isn't working properly, and so on and so forth? That term, so what, is unbelievably important tool in a salesman's toolkit. So, and if it's asked in the right way with genuine interest, which it should be, if you ask, so what impact does that have? So what effect does that have? What you're doing is you are identifying unrecognized needs of the customer. Their recognized needs are those that they explicitly state. Their unrecognized needs are only found by asking effect questions. And when you do this, be sure to engage both sides of the customer's brain. If you ask them, so what do you think about XYZ, you will get a particular type of answer. You can ask exactly the same question again, but just swap the word think for feel, and you will get a slightly different answer. And that nuanced answer can be the difference between making a sale and not making a sale, because you're getting more personal without the customer realizing. They don't realize that you're asking them a personal question when you use the word feel rather than think, but it engages a different part of the brain, as I've demonstrated here in this infographic. And research has shown that actually, despite what buyers say in a survey, the benefits to the buyers as individual motivates buying decisions much more than any other part of the proposal you're putting forward. So don't believe, even in business to business, that all decisions are made based on logic and thinking. A lot of them are based on feeling and based on the individual's motivation rather than what might be good for the organization. Only at this point do you start getting the customer to articulate their needs. If you get them to articulate their needs too soon, you are making them think that it's an easy problem to solve, and you want them to feel that you are God's gift to their organization and you are coming in like a knight in shining armor, saving the day for them. So you need them to explicitly tell you what their needs are, and then paraphrase back to them. So if I understand you correctly, you have a need for, and then use the words that they have used back to them. It shows you've listened, and it creates a much deeper level of rapport with the person opposite you. And then ask about the value or usefulness of your potential solution. You're not telling them what the solution is at this point. You just say, so if we could solve that problem, would that be useful? Would that be helpful? Would that be valuable? Well, the person opposite you has just spent the last 15 minutes telling you it would be. So all you're doing is getting them to say yes. And believe it or not, if you can get a customer towards the end of a sales call saying yes 3 times, and it doesn't matter whether it's saying yes, I'll buy, it's using the word yes towards the end of a sales call actually will help you to win a deal. Okay, if you spent all this time talking to the potential customer and they believe they've got a big issue, then tell them we'll get back to you with a way forward. Now, That could be the next day, it could be in the next hour. But if a customer has just spent the last 15, 20 minutes telling you what a big problem they've got, and you just say, oh, I've got something to solve it immediately here, they won't believe you. So you need to go away and at least say, I'm going to have to think about this and come back to you. It also gives you a chance to put into their language your proposal, your proposition. And then finally, you get to demonstrate your solution. Demonstrating your solution that will solve their problem and meet their needs and provide a benefit to their business, as I said before, at 3 levels: organization, department or project, and personal level. And you need to be getting across the perceived benefits at each of those levels. Now, what can demonstrating your solution look like? It isn't often you telling them, or it can be that, but it also has to be backed up by other things. And this survey from IDC shows that an independent case study or an industry trade white paper or an independent white paper has a lot more validity in influencing a buyer's purchase decisions than a blog from your organization. That doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be doing blogs. It does. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't be doing white papers. You should be. But if you can get independent influencers to demonstrate your solution, if you like, then you have a greater chance of success. So your company's collateral, authoritative third-party collateral, or your own stories are good. If you can get third-party collateral, that's great. The best of all, though, is if you can get a third-party referral. Very difficult to get, but if you can get a salesperson to ask a customer to refer another potential buyer, that's a great way of doing it. And if you can get one of your current customers to call your prospect to say how great your organization is, how great your solution is, that is the best way of demonstrating your solution. So demonstrating your solution is not just going in and doing a pitch and showing your product or service works. It's making sure that the potential customer is, and every member of the decision-making unit is getting positive vibes from various sources about your product or your service. So, process for all sales meetings: situation, problem, effect, need, demonstrate your ability, close the deal. So, if you can remember from this session, need to understand OBB, organizational buying behavior. You need to understand who is in the DMU, decision-making unit. You need to use questioning to a specific qualification criteria, and I've suggested you use optimist as your acronym there. And in terms of sales meetings, spend, situation, problem, effect questions, identify an explicit need, and then demonstrate your ability and close the deal. This is all part of outside-in marketing, which is identifying what is of value to the organization, the department or project, and the individual, and use that sales feedback to add a sensing to market research done by marketers. And at the other end of the process, target your marketing and your sales messages to individuals within the DMU based on what you've found is of value to the organization, the department or the project, and the individual in the DMU. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. With 3 minutes to go, just about made it. Those of you who are interested in more in-depth stuff, particularly around key account management, I am running a key account management course for the business school on the 13th of October, God willing. And I put a URL up there, but if you put in Exec Ed, Essex Business School, key account management, this will come up anyway. So I'll hand over now to Christian for a few questions. Thank you for your attention, everyone.
So I won't bore you with my reflections on their webinar as we are very short on time. Just a quick word to Steve Barnes. We have you booked in for a one-to-one. As far as I remember, that's probably on Tuesday. You would have received an email to your one-to-one. We'll catch up with you then. Then what we're going to do now is use the one last remaining minute to answer a question from Layla, and that is, essentially, let me
I've got it. I've got it, Christian.
Okay.
Okay, Layla. Sorry, Layla's question is, do you find that small independent businesses find it harder to sell a product to larger companies? Only if it is difficult in your own mind. I have often, in fact, only once have I ever worked for the biggest company in an industry. And if you go in with an attitude of, do you know what, I can really help your organization, and you stick to the benefits that dealing with a smaller organization like yours could bring to them, and you go through all the sales techniques I've just told you about, and you establish a good rapport, it's not a problem. The company, the pharmaceutical organization I worked for, was tiny by comparison to others, and we quadrupled our customer base in 3 years, and went from 8 million turnover to 16 million turnover in 3 years. And that was a small company, a very small company, dealing with and selling to the likes of GlaxoSmithKline, Bristol Myers Squibb. We went in with a lot of confidence. We behaved as though we were a big company that knew what it was doing. Our marketing messages made us look like a company that really knew what we were doing. So, Layla, if your external persona of your organization looks and feels like a big company, and if you behave like that when you go in with bags of confidence behind you, it doesn't matter whether you're a small company or a big company.
Awesome. So I'm afraid this is where we have to wrap up. So again, we have been recording this webinar. We will be editing it and distributing it to everyone within the coming days. What we'll also do is we'll share a survey based on this webinar, provide you with a chance to give us some feedback. Please do complete those as well. We take that feedback on board and we constantly improve with what we deliver. And on that note, I would like to thank everyone for, again, attending today, and we'll see you in our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Super, thanks everyone. And I'll see you, Christian, in 9.5 minutes.
Yeah, for our one-to-ones. So anyone that has a one-to-one, we'll see you either today, Tuesday, or Wednesday. See you then. Bye, everyone.